Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, wherever you are. It's Alex getting ready to do the live stream for today. How's it going? Gonna let this just kind of propagate real fast as we go live. Hey, what's up, Plasma Ham? I love easy multiplayer too. But you said Markiplier. But, uh-huh. Everybody loves an easy Markiplier, right? We're gonna go ahead and update to the latest version right now while we're in conversation. I'm just kind of reading through to make sure there hasn't been any big changes. My microphone's kind of quiet. All right, how about this? Let me pull that forward. How are we doing today? It looks like it's being caught all the way. I could be wrong. Make sure that your settings are set properly. You're all right. That's okay. So what we're gonna do real quick while I'm just installing the newest version. There was another update, which is 5.4.204. Hey Sean, how are you doing? So we do have a slight new update from the one I was originally going to cover, but that's perfect because they add some bug fixes. That was a part of my initial concern. So I'm gonna go ahead and install those while we wait. And I'll be going live here in just a moment. All right. I believe that covers it. Let's make sure that GDevelop is being run. All right, there we are. Excellent. Cool. So, hello everyone. Thanks for liking the broadcast and thanks for joining us. I want to cover the newest update of GDevelop update 5.4.204. We were on 203 before, which introduced multiplayer. And I'm sure a lot of you have been seeing this buzzword around. What does it look like and how do we use it under the new changes of GDevelop? So I will be covering this in a short video as well, a recap video, which will be less than 5 minutes. But I want to take the time today to answer any questions that might be out there in our community and hopefully help anybody who's aspiring GDevelop developer to begin on their journey here. So the first thing is that I'm looking at here. Let me go ahead and switch our scene over. Let's do it. Let's push that to you guys. Okay, so right now I have a mock-up that I was working on. This isn't my current version, so I went backwards a little bit so you guys could see what I was doing. So I want to show you all of this from the very beginning, but at first I want to kind of review that for any of you that are interested in learning about finite state machines, I do have other videos on it and I will be covering it extensively in an upcoming video. I'm sorry that I haven't been around everyone recently. For those that are used to watching my videos nearly weekly, I'm working on overhauling and redesigning the way that I do video content. And I'm going to be following a much more rigid school-like structure. And I'm working on an ebook for GDevelop covering all of the documentation. Thank you. I appreciate that. And so I want to show you all that I am using a very basic finite state machine. It doesn't look dissimilar to the usual format that I would use. And otherwise, the game scene events are pretty straightforward. I've been using a little bit of a different system than you guys are used to seeing I'm starting to work on a couple of naming conventions that I think make sense, because I'm testing out a few methods to make sure that it translates well into a written format for my ebook. So that's what's going on here. Otherwise, for those that are used to seeing my finite state machines, you'll kind of see, hey, Riley, what's going on, sir? You'll kind of see that I have that flow. And there's some aired out things because I'm aware of those. But let's jump into the preview so you can see what's going on here. So at the very beginning, when you get to building, oh, okay. We have a situation on the pawn, and because there is no longer an object called pawn, we can change this to obj pawn. There we go. That should fix the issue. It did not. Is this even the right one, Alex? Let's take a look at this. It helps if of players. Okay, we're gonna go back and just name this pawn. Players, objects. Let's go into here and find any reference to that pawn, which was originally in here. We're just gonna change this to players. Oh, yeah. All right, that's okay. This is not what I was anticipating because I didn't realize I had updated it, right? So everyone is aware of what happened. This has been updated on the previous version, but I haven't used the current version, so I need to transfer those documentation differences over. But what would be easier than doing that is just starting over. And so I've got everything prepared for that, and so I'm going to show you guys how to do easy multiplayer right out of the box. Okay? So let's jump into the very basics of creating a multiplayer template. And a lot of requests have come through for simply a modern co-op platformer, right? There's been a lot of requests for that in our community, and I just want to show that off now. There are some really nice multiplayer templates, but for those that need that hands-on first-hand experience, we're going to cover that manually here. So I'm not going to spend too much time going through the basics of all of this just because we've done it so many times, but we're going to jump into it, and I'm going to show you the first few changes that have been made in this version of GDevelop. So for the short video, we'll start here at 10 minutes and 30 seconds. All right, let's go. So the first thing that I want to do here is we're going to create a new project in our playlist, and I'm going to do it on the GDevelop cloud. We're going to call it Jazzcast, whatever. I'm going to do a full HD experience, and we'll make sure that it's compatible. We'll do the landscape 720 version, and then we'll optimize it for pixel art, and we're going to allow players to authenticate in game, and there's a reason for that. That has to do with the new multiplayer system. So with GDevelop, similarly to the achievements, easy multiplayer is now plug and play for every user. So we create a new project, and we can begin by looking at our brand new scene. In the scene events, we see that at the beginning of the scene, we can display an authentication banner, right? So basically what ends up happening while we're going to log in the first time. So if we make a menu or something like that where the players can kind of get into a lobby system or get queued up, it requires some level of authentication. And most people, I think this is where they're going to struggle with this, most people, because they're initially going to try to just force multiplayer to happen without triggering the events that need to happen prior to multiplayer effectively launching, if that makes sense. So now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to go back to the painted fencers briefly, and we're going to launch our game from the main menu. And I want to show you the main menu events. So in the main menu events, I have a basic global structure set up where we have our game key bindings, our player state, and because we have multiple players in our game, this is going to be a 2-player game. We create state as a global structure in our game, and the global structure allows us to use other variables rather than numbers. So an array would be like ID 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know what I'm saying? And so why we use structures is so we can actually use the named dictionary or the named string to attach it. It's sort of like calling an action by an animation for a player by name rather than by number. It's the same sort of mechanic. So we're going to use a structure system in our game, a global variable called structure, which will maintain our players. And there's a challenge player and a champion player because we're going to be playing sort of a round robin style of game where maybe other players can join. They'll be in a queue. They'll get to join the game after, let's say, a player dies. So maybe like a Mortal Kombat style game with a hot seat. So other players can jump in when one player dies, and then you keep playing until you're the leader or you die, and then another player joins in and so forth. So with that sort of system, we have a structure that is going to be synchronized with the server to keep all of the players in sync. That's a complicated thing to digest so early in this video, as well as in general, right? You said a lot of words there, but maybe I don't quite understand, Alex, like what you're trying to convey. When we get into multiplayer structures, there is a format that we sort of have to use. And I'm going to pull up this screenshot. Actually, let's go ahead and I'm going to hide everything in here so I can work on a blank canvas. This is some art I'm working on for a concept for somebody else. But so with this server system, so we have a server. Let's use black maybe. Let's see. We have a server, and then we have a client, right? And so what ends up happening, even in GDevelop, because the host is kind of, in this case, is the server. So we don't have a standalone server. It is the host. So they're kind of one and the same, but you still have to treat them differently. So there's a difference between being the host and being player one. So we have player one, player two, and there is a host role that we need to consider. Now, we can assign player one in the host automatically, and that's kind of how GDevelop instinctually works. However, there is a structure that we need to understand. A server handles everything that's non-graphics. So it does not handle graphics. It doesn't handle graphics. It handles triggers. Triggers are events and things that are managed by the server that end up happening for everyone. Okay? Hey, Funk, how's it going? So because it doesn't handle graphics, the client has to handle the graphics. So even though you're packaging a game that has all the graphics in it and it's a multiplayer structure in GDevelop, what actually ends up happening is your server sends details to a player. The player then executes that information and sends it back to the server. And then the server sends it to every player so that they can be updated. Now, this very quickly becomes a mess. And in standard structures of servers and hosting, it can be a real pain. But GDevelop has made it almost foolproof. Let me show you how this works. So now that we have a structure set up and some basic information, we can look at what I have going on here. So on the main menu, I have two simple scene objects. They're just texts. And I've added the integrated behavior onto them for, at least for the login, to be a button finite state machine. So if you don't have this, it's no longer a third-party thing. You just type button, and it's right there, button states. So once you add button states into your game, we can do other things like hold variables inside of our objects. So in this case, we have a login button that we've created, which is basically a text object that we've turned into a button. We've written prompts as a variable, and rather than doing a structure, I did an array, so you can see how arrays work in this. And we have 0 and 1, because no matter what happens, the first one in our array is always 0, And in programming, we count from 0. So 0 to 1 is 1 point, 1 to 2 is another point. And you'll see this a lot in GDevelop when we're using animations with our player as well. You'll see when you add an animation, it'll be like animation 0, animation 1. Well, technically, you can target those by number, or you can do a structure, and we could name this prompt 1, prompt 2. But in our case, we're going to use an array system, and you can use it like this. So a lot of people, I've been seeing a couple of things. When you're transferring objects, variables from global structures and whatnot, GDevelop knows what it is. So it knows that this is an array. Like the text is looking for an object going in here. Because we've declared it in their variables in some capacity, whether it's in the object or within the global variables, we've declared it, which means that it now knows it's an array, or it's a structure, or it's a string, or a number, or a Boolean. It is aware of that already. So a lot of people are trying to do things where they pass a variable that says like to string, or they'll do a variable like continue underscore login dot to string, and then they'll wrap a variable in this. The only time you need to do a to string is if it's a number that you need to convert. It's if it's a different variable format that you've already declared. So if you've said this is an array and then you want to change it to a structure, you can do that, but you have to call it the expressed way, right? And so that's what that format does. To string, to variable will convert those things over. Now we're going to return back to what I had here, which is the array version. So a lot of people, right, if this was a structure inside of prompts, we would have to pass through the dictionary. Dictionary. Yeah, I can't spell because I have dyslexia. You have to pass through some sort of a variable, a text, a string, right? So you have to pass through a string. Now, because we're using an array, we can simply call the array the number that we wanted to target inside of that array. And in this case, we wanted 1 to be first and 0 to be this one, just because of how I have it set up, right? So now we can call those array functions this way. This is the appropriate way to call an array. So you got to target the number inside of the brackets, for those that don't know. All right, so now we have that system out of the way. We have a basic login system. And I want to show you what this looks like before I deep dive it. So at the beginning, we have no return. So this is null and void. And I'll explain how this works in a minute. But we're changing this to an empty text bracket. And then we're going to call in the our button. Our button here is set to immediately translates over to play. And when we click it, it pops open a window, because I'm already logged in, that we can select one of the lobbies. As you can see, lobby 2 is missing, and I'll explain how that kind of works here in a little bit. We have lobby 1, 3, and 4, and more of these lobbies will appear as they fill up in GDevelop. And so right now, we can click on join, and I'm already in the game. I would have to be waiting for another player to join me, and before I could start the game, and then our game would begin. So I want to digest what that looks like in a written format, and then show you kind of more of a step-by-step process on how to obtain this. So the first thing that we want to look at is our very first conditions. So we have prompt number 1, and then we have prompts number 2 that are supposed to be passing through. So when we first begin, when it's clicked, translate over to if it's prompt number 1, open the game lobbies. If it's prompt number 0, then open the authentication window. And so because I was already logged in, it skipped this process and went straight to this one. And these would change, and I'm using the same thing. So another way of calling an array is by doing point the number now in GDevelop. So this is a new change. You can see when you go to type a variable in GDevelop now, this is a big change that's happened. When you go to type a new variable, because now all variables are under one action call. And to show you that real fast, I'm going to add an action. We're going to go to, let's say, tooltip, and we're going to go to our variables. So now, Kira, welcome. Welcome. Hey, hello from the United States to Brazil. Welcome. Now you'll see that there's just one variable call in version 5.4. So what happens? So some of you may be logging into your project and may be pretty upset on the new change because you don't understand how variables work now. So let me just cover that for you and warn you now that it is very different from any version of GDevelop so far. But in my opinion, this is one of the better changes that's happened in GDevelop. And I know that it brings a lot of work for some people to change things, but that's the nature of open source and all these changes that are happening. You don't have to upgrade to these builds. It's just recommended if you want to follow along on like tutorial videos and things like that. So anyway, so when you go to watch a video now, there's a lot of outdated videos because basically GDevelop's massively changed. So when you go to click on a variable, you can now see all of the declared variables that are already present inside of that array, as well as any sort of array format that would be, or any other sort of object. So now it shows you that this is an array, right? You see that bracket, that's an array. Now, if I had another variable in here, so we can go in here, right, and delete these extra texts. So looking at text number 1, it's 0. I could delete that. And then we'll leave that there. So I want to show you, because before it reported 0 when I launched the game. Now it's nothing. Technically, it's the same as like leaving it, just it's a space, or it's completely void. And then there's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, because I put those in there assuming that maybe I'll have different prompts, different warnings or pop-ups for the player. So the tooltip has an array of 7 children, and now we can access that right here in the variable that we're targeting. So let's go backwards here 1 second. We're going to reopen our action again. Go to tooltip, type variable or var, which now you don't have to type boolean and string or text or anything like that. It's one action, one call. Now we change variable. We go over here and we can see tooltip. And if I now click tooltip 1, which we know is empty, it'll report empty. So if we add any variable, whether it's a boolean or anything like that, it's now all inside of this one section. For new upcoming people who are just now learning GDevelop, I think that this is one of the best changes that could have possibly happened for you. I've done a lot of work in GDevelop over the last couple of years, and I have to say that this is probably, although for some people, one of the most annoying changes, it happens to be one of my favorite changes. And this brings a whole new infrastructure to organization and less confusion in how we use variables, in my opinion. So with that being discussed, I don't want to go too far in there. I know some people might be upset. There are a lot of people that were affected by this, and I don't mean to make light of it, but I do want to show you, right, that these are the changes, and this is what happens. This is progress. This is what happens. Sometimes there's growing pains when engines change and things are happening, but I don't think you should give up. I think that the transition will be really nice and easy for you guys. So again, one of the ways that you can call that prompt now is prompts and dot the number or of the array that we want to target. And the other option is to do it like this. Both are valid formats to be written in. Really, it's up to you. What works for you, what doesn't work for you. So taking a look at this right here, you can use it either way. Again, I'm going to change this back over to 0, and we'll launch our game here. So let's see here. We're having a bit of a change. Let's see. 0 is login. That is play. It is returning. It should be returning 1. Oh. You are not currently logged in. And if we are currently logged in, then we need to return tooltip number 1. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they changed this and now you can't do it that way. Do I have to do it this way? That would be very interesting. I don't think so. It looks like... Why are you returning 0? Hello? Let me double check here that I'm not going crazy. Tooltip 0. Let me see what happens if I do it this way. let me remove these extra. Maybe we're having a weird hiccup here. I'm not sure why that would be. We're going to add a space inside of that. There it goes. Okay, so it was turning 0 because there was no input inside of it, which that's a bug. And I'll make sure I reach out to that. Should be a bug. There's no way that that is intentional because it used to return nothing as a string, unless I accidentally set it as a number, which is possible. But no, it's a text, so that shouldn't be happening. This should return nothing. If there's nothing in it, it should be blank by default, right? Because it's not a number. But I think when they combined everything, that's one of the bugs that is going to happen. So we're going to then just type a single space to get rid of that bug for now. And there we go. Because space is a text component. So a space bar is technically a empty character inside of your font. When you go to install a font, for those that don't know, this is just a little bit of information. Each of your like A and B are like, they look like keys inside of a picture. And then it registers each one as the letter it's supposed to be, because Windows has like a default format for these to be in order. And it reads that and then translates that to a text. And with that, 0 or a space is technically a blank one of these. It's not nothing. It's just a empty picture, like a transparent picture. So it registers as a keystroke. And that's why when you type passwords in sometimes, you know, it says like you can't have spaces. That's because a space is technically a magic key. It's a blank key. So that's technically why that happens. Hopefully they'll fix that soon. We're going to press play and going back into the lobby system. Now, if you're like, but Alex, I am one person. How do I play my multiplayer game with other people? How do I play by myself? How do I test? Well, this is how. So we're going to go into our launch preview. So we're going to go into our previewer, launch the drop-down menu, go down into launch preview in, and we're going to do review 2 previews and 2 windows. I'm going to readjust the screen so that they're side by side mostly. Hello, there we go. Let's use the window feature. There we are. And now we'll press play on both of these. Now it's really cool because when you're in preview, you can technically play with yourself. So now I can ready up on each of these, and I can press ready. So once I do that, once the host is ready, because they're the first one in, the player 1 is hosting, we're going to start the game. We get a nice little countdown, and then it loads into your game. And now you can do tons of menus or other options here, but once we get started, now we have a multiplayer experience. Now, I've disabled my key bindings at the moment. And to fix that temporarily, what we can do is we can go into the player. We're going to break the player finite state machine because the new update did so anyways. But we can go back in and turn on our default controls for the platformer object. And I'll just show you that now those work technically and they're in sync, but it's one character. So how this works is technically the host owns every object when it's created in the game. And there's ways to synchronize those and share those with other players, but I want to go back to the menu here. We're going to relaunch it from the menu. Oops. We're going to do it in the preview mode. Sorry, my brain is still booting up. It's been a minute since I've done a video with you guys. Got to get back in the format of trying to teach and talk at the same time. Now we're going to ready up, get back into our game. And now we'll see that each player has their own control and their own movement. So technically right now we have a multiplayer game with very, very minimum code. I'm going to show you just how little code you need to make something like this. So one thing I want to address though is going back to that multiplayer design element that we talked about before I get into the nitty gritty. We have a host, which is going to be represented by blue, and then we're going to have the players, which in this case will be red. And I just need to draw some stuff real fast for visual. That's too big. There we go. All right. So let's talk about this. So this is the host. And the host owns everything. They own all of this, technically. So what we need to do when we start GDevelop is when a object is created, we have to assign it to one of the clients. So we have, you know, each of these is, let's say, player 1, player 2, player 3. That's a terrible color. Player 4, right? I don't like that color either. All right. So now that we have each of our players, we would then have to create something from the host and branch it and give it to each of the players. And so there's a very easy way of doing that in GDevelop. And once we have a player selected, we need to send that signal back to the server. So again, for those that may have missed it, when in the last example, when a signal is triggered, so this is an event, right? These green dots are events. Whenever an event or a trigger happens on the host or a server, it must relay the information to all of the players or peers in the game. And then whatever a peer does, it needs to send that information to the server for an update. And then the server relays that information back into each of these objects. So we have a check and balance system that gets really messy. And that's why things like lerp and ping or latency is an issue in video games. Because what happens is when a signal is sent, there is a time-related stamp. So let's say at 4:01 in the afternoon at 0.1 millisecond, right? This player sent a signal, but then their ping is closer to the server, so the server receives it first. But they sent a signal at 0:0, and though their ping is more, it got sent second, but needs to be read first. And this is where creating multiplayer games gets very difficult and very frustrating, because you have to understand some of these core concepts to be able to make a multiplayer game. But GDevelop has sliced that difficulty curve in half, if not in fractions, like greater fractions. So enough waffling, Alex. Show us how to do it. All right. So the reason why I showed you, though, about this piece being first is GDevelop does something much similar to Unreal Engine, and that we now have objects that are asynchronous. And what that means is that they synchronize in real time between all objects. Their Unreal Engine has something like this, and it's called replicatable or replicatable object. So yeah, it took me a second. So a replicatable object is an object that can be repeated an infinite number of times, that have perfect independent controls that could be assigned to another person and operate in a multiplayer and synchronized fashion. So it doesn't necessarily have to be controlled by someone, but like if it is created and controlled by the server, or i.e. the host, and a barrel explodes, it needs to apply that damage and read it to each of the players, right? So with using asynchronous sort of stuff and using this replicatable style system, we can synchronize these objects by a single behavior. So now what we need to do when we create something in GDevelop, and what I've done here, is I've created they've created the basic format for getting us in, and I've created the basic controls. Now, because the default controls are read on the client side as well as the server is able to read and place that character in real time where it's supposed to be. But let's say in our game, right, we have flipping. We want our character to turn around. Now, even though I'm walking backwards, even if I created code that said flip the player around, it would only do it on one client at a time, which means that if I turned around on this, if I was being red player and I had a script that turned me around when I walked to the left, it would only happen on that player's screen who's moving to the left. And that's because of this asynchronous sort of the server logic. So if you flip around left or right on your client as your character, you then need to send that signal to the server to tell everyone else to update their game to let them know that you're right where you're supposed to be. And this is where that beginning, if you don't really understand how GDevelop works, this is going to be very challenging for some people. So let's digest it one step at a time. And we're going to look at all that we have here is a login system, right? This is all I have for a login system. I will bundle this up and I'll add it to the video contents if you guys would like on itch when we're all done, so you guys can take a look at the main menu, create your own menus, and just have a good reference starting point. And again, everyone, I've been having a lot of conversations with folks in the community in and outside of our YouTube, as well as in GDevelop at large. I want to reaffirm with you that when you're doing tutorials, it's really important that you find an instructor that you can understand and that you work well with or vibe with, because one of the things that'll happen is you'll get stuck in what everyone kind of knows as tutorial hell. And tutorial hell is where you, for those that don't know, is where you start following tutorials, but you don't really learn anything. And the point of my channel is to educate you on how and why, and hopefully give you the backbone that you need, like the backbone fundamentals, not a physical backbone. I'm not telling you to get good. What I meant to say was, I want to give you the infrastructure, the background that you need to be able to think like an engineer and to recreate your own stuff. So what I teach here is mechanics that you can translate into your own system, and you don't need me to keep guiding you forward. It's going to be a system that by the time you're done with it, it is an organized system that is multifaceted. It can work in any programming language. It's not just GDevelop. You can translate this to anywhere you want. And that's what's really important. So yeah, getting stuck in tutorial, heck yeah, is unfortunate. And what I can recommend is take a step back. It's about learning, not copying, but at the same time, all artists copy work. So what I like to say is follow the tutorial around the first time, listen to it twice, follow it the first time, and copy everything I do, because I'm going to explain why I do it every single step of the way. And then once you have that knowledge, you can use that as a reference to how do I set it up. I'm not going to do it all for you. I'm going to stop, and there's going to be programming challenges. And I've got a whole course coming, which will be a classroom style setting, step-by-step process on how to learn GDevelop and how to learn all these tools, kind of like Udemy and other classes like that. So it will be available, and we're going to be deep diving everything to do with it. But if you follow along, I promise you, you're going to walk away with skills that you didn't have before. And it's not because you just copied what I was doing. It's because I explained it to you while you were working on it. And this is a teaching technique that works. It's hands-on learning, and I think it'll work for you too. Even if you're not someone who is a visual person, maybe you need more explanation and written format. I think that this is broken down in such a way that this will work for everyone. So follow along here. Don't pull away from me because you don't want to follow the tutorial because you're afraid of it overriding what you know, but chances are you're going to learn something here. So hang on tight, guys, and stick with me. So outside of our game, I have a huge finite state machine that's kind of processing it. I say huge, but it's the basic one that I normally have. And inside of that, we just have this menu. So all of this extra stuff, it really is extra stuff. Let's go back to our other project. Let's build it from the ground up. All right, time for Alex to be quiet for a minute. And let's move back over to JazzedCast. All we've done is set up a basic scene. For those that missed it early in this video, all we did is create a basic scene and allow player authentication. I'm going to skip the login part of this because I will bundle all of this together and we will work on a menu later. But right now, I have I'm about to release a whole video on how to make menus. And in that video, I will show you how to make multiplayer menus in that as well. So that video is coming very soon. But here we are in the beginning. We're going to use default GDevelop, no external extensions whatsoever. So knowing that we're going to need multiple players and things, and I'm going to be developing this without a finite state machine because I want to show you a base user how simple this really is. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an object, and we're going to start with a regular sprite because we're doing 2D. And we're going to name this player, or we're going to do object, so obj_player. So object player. Now, because we're going to have multiple players, I'm using a player object that we're going to assign to different players. So there's a variety of ways that we can do this. There's checks and balances that we can build, but GDevelop makes it absolutely dead simple. So what we're going to do is we have a player object. We're going to import images, and what I want to do is add an not add an animation, sorry, add an image, and I want to use this store assets. I don't want to use anything that I have to upload somewhere else. We're just going to look for a character, and what we can do is use one of these RPG characters. Let's see here. A character. Nope. Let's say a knight. Maybe there's a knight. Oh my goodness, Alex. All assets, knight. Okay. Perfect. So we're just going to grab this public domain knight character. And let's say we wanted it to be different sprites, or like different the player colors. There we go. I had a whole brain malfunction there. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. If you have maybe an idea where the players are different objects, let's say a player can be like player 1 is the main hero, and player 2 is like Mario's hat or an orb or something that isn't the same character. We can create multiple objects and assign them to the other players, and or we can have a single object that manages all of the players. Now, what I want to do is show you an interesting method that you can use to take one sprite and change them colors without changing a bunch of different variables. So rather than creating a whole sprite sheet that's like blue character, red idle, blue idle, right? We're just going to have just idle. And I'm going to create another one that maybe we'll have another frame that's like run. We won't have it now, but as an example. But what we could do is, to use this the right way, we can go to edit with Piskel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this blue, and we're going to change this blue into a default gray color. And technically we could do it with any. But I'm going to use two different colors. We're going to use light blue, or light gray, and dark gray. I think I said blue. I don't know what's going on. And dark. That won't work. We'll just make that black as well, or basically dark. And we'll do light there. Okay, so now we have a grayscale character. Now we could do it with any color, because all you have to do is go in here and grab the color, the hex color code, and we're gonna save this now, and we're gonna overwrite the one we currently had. Now we have a gray character. And so the process I'm using is one object for all the players, and then we need to add a behavior, which is the multiplayer behavior. So we need a couple of things because we're making a platformer, and I'm gonna add them in order. We're going to add the platformer character, the behavior for object platformer. We're going to leave all of it default because I'm just showing you how easy it is to set up defaultly out of the box. And then we're going to add the multiplayer object behavior. This one down here looks like a controller. And then we get to set it to who controls this object. All right. Now, this is interesting because there's a host object as well as player 1, player 2, all the way to player 8. Again, that means that the host technically doesn't have to be a player or in control of the player 1 object, like I was explaining before. We're going to start this object being owned by the host or the server, and then we're going to assign each player as they are connected to the game. So for each player that's in the lobby, or for each player that's connected, create this object and assign it to that player. So now that we have that, we could simply just add two objects to the game and press play. These objects would, of course, fall. We're going to increase their size just so you can see them better. And of course, right now at this current state, if I press preview, they're both going to fall. And at the same time, if I press preview and press left or right, they would move together because I'm using the previewer to explore all of these features, right? So the other thing we need in a basic platformer, and what I like to do, first I'm going to set up my grid at a 32 by 32, and we're going to activate that grid that's a mask, Alex, we need the grid, there we go. And we're going to create another object. It's going to be a tiled sprite. It could be a regular sprite if you want, but I prefer using tiled. And we're going to call this collision. And it's going to be 32 by 32. We're going to edit with Piskel, and we're going to set it to just this big red block. And to show you why we use tiled sprites, I've covered this pretty extensively in other videos, but we're going to just very quickly go through our sprite object. Hello, Alex. It helps if you go to the very top. We're going to create this little cube so you can kind of see what's going on. And then each corner, we're going to make it a box. We're going to save that. And now we have a collision cube. So now that we have a collision cube, we can drag it in. And because it's a tiled sprite, it will indefinitely recreate itself in any direction, or like as we pull it around, right? And what that means for us in this case is that we now have a block that can be used to design any level we wanted in prototype. So, you can change this to fit the scale of your game, but it's an indefinite thing. And it creates itself, it retextures itself for every 32 by 32 because that's the size of the sprite. Now, if I used an actual sprite and I stretched it, that's what it would look like. It looks bad. And that's what you guys saw originally on my my preview. So, of my other game. So we're going to press preview again here, and now we fall through the map because the object doesn't have the collision behavior. So all we have to do is go into that and add the platform behavior. I'm going to turn off ledges can grab ledges because that it does mess with some stuff. We just don't need that. And so we're going to go back into here, and now we have collision and we have movement. Okay, so we have two objects, right? But they're controlled by one player, and even if I uploaded 2 players right now, it wouldn't work. It would still be controlled by the host. So first of all, we need a way to differentiate these 2 players. And I said before we weren't going to add a custom extension. I lied. I forgot it. I think it is a custom extension, and I want to make sure that we have it. And so I'm going to type color, and it's color conversion is what we're looking for. No, sorry. I lied. It's not color conversion. It's object recolorizer. It's an experimental feature by DHA or Davey, who is one of the GDevelop developers who works on this, works on for GDevelop, right? So it's a reliable extension. Hopefully it'll soon make its way into the actual program, and it won't be an external extension because I believe that this should be in here. This is amazing. So what we can do now is we can remove the player object completely, and we're going to create the player object using programming, and then we're going to use that programming sequence to create for each player that's connected. So what we can do in our objects is now we have a couple of multiplayer conditions. So we can go check out multiplayer, right? The current number in lobby, and if the lobby game is just started, which is kind of like at the beginning of the scene. So if the lobby game has just started, which is we loaded into the game and now there's something going on, we want to create, we're going to use Shift and D, and we're going to create this sub event. And what I'm going to do is just create a comment. That's not the right button, Alex. We're going to create a comment just to separate these two so you can see it a little bit better. And I accidentally turned this into, I don't even know what that is. What is going on? All right. Oh, local variables. Oh, I forgot to cover that in this as well. Okay, we'll cover that in a second. So in the lobby game started, that is the any action you call in GDevelop, to make sure that you understand this, everyone. When you are calling an object from inside of GDevelop and you want it to or whatever it is, it needs to be, if it's called more than one time in your script, you need to stop doing that and make it its own call one time and put other objects as its child underneath it. And so because the lobby game is started, this kind of works like at the beginning of the scene. It triggers once already. This is a one-time trigger. So at the beginning of the game, see, we don't need to trigger once here. We already know it's going to happen once. Once it got started, we want to check another condition, and we're going to check another multiplayer condition. Oh my goodness, multiplayer. There we go. Current player number in lobby. No, we want see. Let's see here. Number of players in lobby. In this case, we're going to say if it is 2. If it is 2. In this case, we have to have 2. It's only a 2-player game. If the current number in the lobby is 2 when the game is started, then we're going to trigger a creation event. So we're going to use the action to create an object. We're going to create the player object, and we're going to call it at position, let's say 0, and we'll do the Y position of the screen height divided by 2. And actually, we'll do screen width divided by 2. So it'll spawn in the middle of the screen for each one. So if I hit play, there are no players in the lobby right now because we never entered the game via lobby. So to do it this way, right, I need to have a menu that then loads the player in so we know how many people are in the lobby. So because we don't have that, we can do an or statement. And so we're going to do or, and then we're going to type preview. If the preview is running, pre-R-E, there we go, V-I-E-W, preview. If the game is running in preview mode, which means that we're running the game, which there means that now we have if one of these is true, if the game has 2 players in the lobby is started, and or the game has is in the previewer, we're going to create an object the number of times to this. Now, normally I would repeat for something like this, but in this case, we're going to create one character. You could do it like this if you wanted to. You could do an action that then reads, we take the numbers of lobby, we pass that through to an action or a variable. So one thing that we could do is, let's see here. I want to introduce you to local variables. So at the beginning of this scene, we have there's a new feature inside of GDevelop, which if you're a programmer, this would be I'm sure that you would be very interested in this. If you click this, we declare a local variable. A local variable is much like a scene variable, but it's only located in that specific event. This is huge for GDevelop. This is huge for people coming with various other backgrounds of programming. These are independently declared variables that are only managed in the script. So that means external scripts can now have their own local variables. That makes player finite state machines and other finite state machines far more accessible. And you can now declare them right at the beginning of your game scene. So at the beginning of the game scene, we're going to create a variable called player count, and then we're going to set it as a number of 0. So what we could do effectively is, because we're declaring this variable at the very beginning, right, and we're setting it to 0, we now can change if the total number of players in the lobby is 2, we could then, instead of creating a player here, we can set the action to var. And now if it is a variable, let's see here, variable state, it needs to be a local variable. Let me look at this. Oh, that's a good question, actually. Variable. How did they do it in here? Change a variable, index. So it's all under 1 now. This is interesting. So it doesn't declare it the way I thought it would. So it seems like if the variable, I'm just going to hit OK here because it is an action. We're creating it here, so it's not declared, if that makes sense. Even though we're declaring it in the script vent, it's not declared here. So we need to then change player count equal to let's see, multiplayer, current player number, players in lobby count. So technically we don't need this here, but this is how you would kind of structure that. I'm just kind of showing you a few different ways we could go around this, but you have to find a way to create your objects. They could be pre-created. Maybe there's always one player on the scene, and if there's an extra player, spawn another player. Tons of different ways to do this. So this isn't the only way, but I'm going to show you the various ways that you could do it. So this is how you use a text expression. We're using the multiplayer behavior, and then we're using the extended feature that we can pull from it called player in lobby count. So if it's over than 2, we're going to take the total number of players. In this case, we could say maybe greater than, even. Let's do greater than or equal to 2. So if it's 2 or more players, change player count equal to the number of players in the game. And then we're going to create, we could do a, let's see, repeat. So this would be a repeat function. So add repeat. Repeat this a number of times equal to player count. Let's see, it'd be player count. And then once we repeat that a number of times, we can then create the object for the player at the position of screen width, screen height. And I've already, I deleted it earlier. Okay. I will, create, action create. We want to create the player at screen width. That's not the right one. Width divided by 2. And then we're going to copy that in and just change width into height and divided by 2. So now it should just put it straight in the middle. when we create it, and it didn't because, again, we're trying to create a player in lobby. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to set this because we're in the editor. So now we could break this down a little bit differently. This could be two different features. We could do it like this as well. Again, I'm just kind of showing you guys a couple different ways you could do it. If that happens, do this. If this happens, set this to 1. And then it should create a character. But I'm not... There might be a... There needs to be another way to call a local variable. Is there... How do you do this? So this actually, I don't know, everyone. It's just you guys are watching me solve this in real time. How do you contend if player count as a number, declare player count as a number with 0? But how does it know? It's not a scene variable or a global variable, guys. Huh? So I actually haven't used local variables because I normally wouldn't anyways. So this is, it's interesting. I like that they added it to it. I think it's necessary, but I don't know where they put local. I would have thought that that would have worked, but maybe not. Huh. Well, we're gonna create a global variable, and we're just because now I'm not sure how to use the local ones. We're just going to set the global variable to player count, and we're going to have to reuse this system. So I'm going to edit this, delete it. Oh, you know what? Let's watch the tutorial. Let's look at this real quick. I realize that you're not getting audio. Give me a second. Oh, that actually makes a total amount of sense. Okay. Maui? I want to say it's Maui. Maui makes games. I could be wrong. That makes a lot of sense. I wasn't sure how GDevelop had processed that, but what they had just said is at under the sub event of the child, I now can access that declaration. So this format that I was trying to do, there we go, it fixed itself. Wouldn't really be ideal in this format because of how I have it. I would need to move that variable, that declaration, over to here. So we're going to add a local variable into here and call it player count with a number of 0. And then we're going to remove that declaration up here. We're just going to create a new parent or a new event and reorganize for a second. There we go. I did not mean to delete that one. There we go. So now we can, and thank you for that, Maui. That makes sense. So it's the same thing. When you declare it, it actually does make way more sense now that I'm thinking about it with that explanation. I would have found out in that video from Wesley. But it makes sense because you want to use that variable only when it's necessary. And it's kind of nice because in this way, as a programmer, there's so much more that we can do with local variables because we don't need to push it to a those global variables get really messy very quickly. Exactly. It only, in this case, these events only, these variables only exist when the event exists. So if you don't need it, don't run it. And that's going to save a lot of resources in the long run in GDevelop, making games more efficient and also lowering the bulk of the weight. So now, now that we're playing, again, we should be having some level of character. And I think it's actually because my math is bunk. So we need is, it would be screen width minus screen width divided by 2. And it would be the same thing for height. I believe it's creating the character, but because I'm a dingus, it actually isn't creating it in the right location. Nope, that's wrong. Let's go check our debugger real fast, because now all of a sudden, normally last time I created a menu first, but I just wanted to make sure, yeah, the player isn't actually spawning. So let's take a look here. Oh, well, it would help if I set that to actually have a player. But still no dice. Let's go check our debugger real fast and make sure that our game is running, and it is. So let me validate here that I am using this correctly before I go about. If the lobby is just started and it's better than 2, if it's in preview mode, change the player count to 1, and we're spawning a number of player count, repeat, create it. We'll just trigger this once. Well, it's already happening up there. Local variables are going to throw me in a loop, because that's not how I normally would do it. And I'll show you what I did previously. I'm trying to... I always do this to myself, guys. What's happening right now is that I just overwrote what I was trying to do. Okay. What I did previously, so here you can see that there's no players, right? Inside of the main menu, or not inside, when we load our game scene, inside of our game scene events, at the beginning of the scene, we create one character because there's no champion, and then there's no player pawn. And then all we do is we check if you own the player. So at the beginning of the scene, if the player champion is equal to 0, so there is no current player, like player 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, there's the player number would go into here. So if there's no one in there, if it's default, so we'll go to the global variables, and I'll show you here. If there is challenger number 0, champion 0, then we're going to create it that way. So it looks like potentially, I'm not sure with the way that lobbies are structured, how, without doing more of that deeper math part of it, I do know how to do it. The question is, can I do it as simply as possible? You know, you could just simply at the beginning of the scene create X amount of people. Like I was going about it kind of a long-term sort of way, but I think that the way I'm trying to tackle it in the other script is largely going to make more sense than doing it something like this. But I think it really comes down to what style of game are you making? How do you want to do it? You know, in my Super Toast World build, what I would do is, because it's already a single player game, if I wanted to add co-op to it, and maybe that might be a good example here as well, now I'm thinking about it, but it's pretty straightforward. So let me show you. So if I add this player in this current script, he's spawned as that white object, like the black and white one, and we use that colorizer as soon as it's created to target the white color and shift him to a different color. And we could do that with anyone, so you can have one sprite for all the players. And then because we have a player finite state machine, all you have to check is upon creation of your player into the game world, right? We're going to set this to player 1. So the player who owns this is player 1. And we could set it to like current player or host if we wanted to at the beginning. And then we set this one to player number 2. And that's why when I preview the game, those two characters can be operated at different times using that trigger, and it passes the ownership of it. So in our player state machine, rather than just running the player state machine like this, we simply just put it underneath a single event that says object to the player. If it's owned by the current player, allow that player to do input. Now, player input, because it is a synchronized object, so going backwards to where we just were, okay, so let's see here real quick. Let's see if I can trigger this at the beginning of the scene. I might actually want to do my declaration. I'm just going to create, at the beginning of the scene, we're just going to create a player just to get this part in. So at the beginning of the scene, just authenticate the banner and create one player. We're going to create them at the appropriate location, right? So he's there and he can move. So we're already creating one. Now, let's say we already knew that our game was always co-op. We just create 2 players, and now they're on top of each other. So what I'm going to do is change the, we're going to add, let's say, 32 pixels to this spawn. So now we have 2 characters in 2 directions. Okay. So now that we have this created, we can add when this guy is created in the multiplayer. So we'll go multiplayer, and actually we need to click on the object and then do multiplayer. We can now take ownership of the object or assign it to a position. So I'm just going to type multiplayer again. Hello. I guess it won't. I guess it's just an objects now. Interesting. They've rearranged a couple of things since I last looked at it. Player object ownership, we're going to set this one to player number 1, and we're going to set this one to player number 2. Now, we could do a co-op game as well, a couch co-op, which would then not require any sort of ownership unless you wanted online multiplayer and couch co-op at the same time, which is possible as well. You just have to add, for each local player, you'd have to add them into a player slot and all of that. But here we go. Now, we set the ownership at the beginning of the scene, but because there is no other players, the object has a there's a text expression inside of GDevelop that we can look at for multiplayer. That is when a player leaves, we can delete their player, for example, or we can change the ownership on when they leave, or we can delete an object when they leave, right? And there are some settings built into the system where it will default back the ownership in advanced settings. We can kind of set what happens. So if this is owned by the host, and now when it's created, it leaves the host, goes to player 1, goes to player 2. That's what we're telling it to do. But when there's no player 2, we can give the ownership back to the host, do nothing, and destroy the object. Now, it can't delete the object right now because we're in the previewer, and there is no player 2, so the host takes over all of those positions. If I wanted to change that, all I'd have to do is create that menu that assigns the players in the lobby, and then you log in like the other system. So again, I'll be making the multiplayer login later in that video that just recaps it very quickly on how to do it, and then we won't do it on live because it won't be all over the place. But effectively, once you add ownership to the object, it's as simple as loading into the lobby and assigning the player ownership. So I showed you very briefly here. We're going to set this to player 2. We're going to launch this again. And now player 1, player 2 is appropriately set up. All we would have to do is create a login, and both of the players would be able to move. And I'm going to save this again, and you guys keep seeing me jump back and forth. To make sure that this is working appropriately too, we can actually recolorize this player before I go back to the other, let's say recolorize. Oh, I have to add it as a behavior. Don't forget that, guys. Don't be like me. We got to go in here and add the color recolorizer. And now that we have it added, we can simply go into here. When player 1 takes over this instance, we can add just recolorize the object. And if you get stuck in here and you don't know what to type, so the scope of the hue is 0, the saturation is 100%, because we want it to not change from the color we pick, and the lightness is also 100%. So 0, 100, 100, and then we need to pick the color and then set it to another color. So what we're going to do is go back to the player object by double-clicking on the, going to the scene and double-clicking on the player object, going to edit with Piskel. We're going to make sure we have the right color, because it has to be perfect, we're going to take this one first, this dark gray, and I'm going to take the color code. We're just going to close out of that. We don't need to do anything there. I copied it. We're going to move over here, and we're going to select that color. And what we can do is double click in here, open this, and then paste it into the color code. You can't just paste it in like I just tried to do. You actually have to set it like this. And we can set the color. Let's set it back to that like kind of blue color that he was in the beginning. And you'll see that player number 1 now will be transferred into blue, and the other one will be gray. So that's how color recolorizing would work if you're using the same sprite and you want them like different colors. And that way you can use one object, one finite state machine, and control it independently. So now we could say when we create our finite state machine, we need to create an event that checks whether or not we own, and if the object ownership belongs to the player, or if the variable of this object is ownership. Like if you own that, let's say you owned a base or a stash box in your game, you could set the ownership of that stash box to you and then lock out other players so they couldn't get into it, or maybe transfer ownership to them or whatever. And that's how you do variable ownership, maybe like a Boolean toggle, or add their name to a list of players who can access it. access it, or maybe it's a pin code. There's tons of ways. But if you want to check an actual object, we just check that object, and if it equals to the current player, or is the object is owned by the current player, then we could do something special. So if the object is owned by the current player and then that player does something specific, then toggle that to happen. So a finite state machine would basically be like this. We would then say if the object is owned by the current player, we would then initialize the finite state machine. And that would then, we would then go back into GDevelop and turn off our default controls, and enabling our finite state machine to take control. It's really important that you turn that off. And then your game would just function. So this basically, that what I just showed you, excuse me, is the same exact thing that happens here in Paint Fencers. And so going back to the actual game script, we can create those. Now that we have the players created, we simply do that one check. Now that we're on the same page, one check for the player ownership, and if it is, run the player finite state machine. We're taking into account something that's linked to all the players, but currently I removed that, so that isn't even part of what we're doing. So that's irrelevant. Otherwise, it's the basic finite state machine. This would work for Metroidvanias and everything else. However, there is one problem with this format, and it goes back to what we had discussed earlier today about this format here. So we're going to go backwards again. And now visually, we're going to break down each step that we have to do. So now that we have the player finite state machine in service, and the player and the client share this information, we know what the finite state machine is. And because the object is synchronized, these two players are synchronized, every time input is done, it'll send it either direction. Now, there is a conflicting factor here where anything in the finite state machine that changes a visual, so anything visual that changes must be sent back to the server to then be fixed for all of these players. So what does that look like? That's the next step, because ultimately that's how you synchronize things between players. So right now, the only thing that we're synchronizing is the position and the animation based on, and not even truly the animation. It's just they all create with the same basic instructions, idle. And so we all, as each player, already know that we're idling. So what we need to do is in our runtime script, we need to manage the multiplayer section. So I'm going to create a event group, and this is, let's say, multiplayer manager. We're not going to do an event script. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking for signals from the player. So if the player sends a signal, right, this is that message. Actually, it's probably called message, now that I'm thinking about it. A custom message has been received from another player. This goes to all the clients. If the message is flipped, then we're going to flip the character. So if the message is flipped or unflipped, we're going to change the direction of our player. So the very first thing inside of the player movement object, because I'm not doing a finite state machine for this big part, that's redundant. I wouldn't spend the time doing that. We're just going to do direction flip. So what we do now is inside of our game, we check for flipped and unflipped. And if it is flipped, do something. So we need to do it for both the client and the server. So the game scene is the server, if you will. So because we have a game scene, whatever we're running, all of the information is being processed through local variables or scene variables that make sure that that is the main server. So if that is the case and a message is sent, this is client and server duality, because we don't technically have real servers in GDevelop like this. We don't have like a standalone or a dedicated. So all the players need to receive this message as well. We could put it in the finite state machine, but it doesn't really make sense because it's a global level thing. It happens for all the players. So when a message is sent, okay, and what we want to do, if you really want this to be accurate, is there's a little hidden thing that you can do, and it's called while. While this message is being sent, we want to do something. And the reason why we use a while condition is because remember when I was saying that when a player sends a signal, it sends that time and date stamp. What happens is that's called a packet, right? So we have these little packets of information that are being sent back and forth. And when that packet arrives, there's a kind of like a brief like computing delay where it tries to figure out what's going on. And based on multiplayer functions, if you lag or disconnect from the server basically, and this signal is skipped in that list, it will only send that signal. It'll keep sending it per frames until like you get it. But doing the while guarantees that it will effectively, it will continuously run while that signal's coming in. So if you do frame skip while that signal's coming in, you won't skip over it. It'll guarantee more or less that you get it. So while this condition comes in, do this action. And so when flipped comes in, we're just going to trigger this once while true, because every time the message comes in, we have to do something. So repeat this, trigger it once. While it's coming in, because we're using a while loop, we need to close the loop with a trigger once. So while it's coming in, look for it, trigger it once while it happens, and then if the player is flipped or isn't flipped, flip the player. So in this case, if the pawn, so we're going to go trigger once. So if the message is received flipped, we're going to flip the pawn. So we're going to and if the message from another player is sent, trigger this once, and then flip that player's pawn. Flip. We're going to do flip object horizontally. So that, and we're going to say yes, and then we're going to flip it to no. So flipped, unflipped. So now inside of the player finite state machine, in the move section, when we move our player, I had a 3D flip here. We're going to change the 3D flip to just a regular flip horizontally, yes, and then the other one is no. So now we have a local script happening which will change you, and then we have a signal coming in from other players in the game scene. So the game scene is kind of the server, and each player is kind of effectively partially a server. So because there's a backend infrastructure, so basically you're waiting for a signal to be sent in from another player to the server, and then you personally will address that. So now, right now, there is, because the player finite state machine isn't actually operating, so we're going to change this. If the object pawn is currently owned by the player and we flip it around, it should flip. Let's make sure that's not working because we have our finite state machine turned off. Hello? Oops. Let me go back here. Let's take a look at this. We'll go back to the main menu. We'll launch it from the beginning. And because my finite state machine is actually kind of messed up right now because I haven't fixed it for this version, what we can do briefly, so rather than pressing all these buttons, we can simply say that if, let's pull this action out. I'll leave it in there, but I did copy it out. We're going to go back in the game scene. We're going to disable the player's movement. So assuming that you don't know what a finite state machine is and you haven't done it before, we're going to trigger this once when the player is moving in a direction. So we can do, the condition is left, or key simulated, so simulated. Yeah. Control pressed. If we're going to say if the left key is pressed, flip, and if the right key is pressed, don't flip. Well, in this case, it's going to flip both directions. So, no. Now, whenever it's simulated, when you press that button, do that. And then when a message is sent, do that as well. So when you do this button and you flip, you need to send an action that goes out from your player called a message. You need to send a message that says flipped. And then you need to send... we're just going to send no content, and then we're going to send the message unflipped, and now we have flipped and unflipped. So we have, because we're playing with the default controls and I don't have the finite state machine set up, that we're using the simulated key press. And now, because we're being because you're the host, you have to launch it in preview. Launch both of these up. And I have to launch it from the menu, not from this scene. So let's go back to our game scene menu, set this preview for all, launch 2 preview windows. We're going to put one on this side and one on that side. Let's press play. Get into our lobby system, ready up our characters, and we're going to start the game. Now, ideally, when I move left on one screen, it's going to flip it around. Now, this is interesting because it's actually flipping both characters And I think that's because of the I forgot to add the ownership. So we still need that ownership clause right here. So effectively, what we want to do is restrict the flipping to only happen when you own the object. So if you currently own this pawn, if you own the pawn and you press left or right, flip your character. So now when we launch that preview, it shouldn't flip the other character. And the reason, and that's why we have to do it in two different parts, because if it flipped it every time you were walking, it'd flip both players, if that makes sense. And I think we also have to declare that while we send that trigger, we want it to only flip if that by the player who sent the signal. So there's a couple. This works a little bit differently than THNK, or because I usually use think as my server backend, but I believe that this is true. We're gonna find out. Okay, so we're actually receiving the signal on both sides still, and that's because the flip isn't taking into consideration your character. So we don't want your character to flip, but we only want them to flip. And I'm actually curious, because it's an asynchronous character, we might not have to do this. I may have just led you guys astray. If this is the case, I will be so blown away, so thoroughly impressed. Let's find out. Because in THNK, you do have to do that. And as we can see here, there's currently a game being played, which is me. But we're not there anymore because I left really fast and recreated a new one. So the server hasn't caught up yet that I left that game. But that's okay. We're going to go back into here again. Oh, my mind is blown, everyone. Mind blown. Mind blown. What? Holy cow. That changes everything. Huh. Right. So, originally... Alright, I gotta take my glasses off. This is a big moment. So, I've led you guys on like an hour-long venture here, and you guys watch me in real time just figure something out. This is amazing, and I hope all of you just gasped at the realization of what this means. With that behavior synchronization, you remember how I was talking about how beyond this state, Unreal Engine has something called replication, replicatable objects. What's actually happening is exactly the same thing. Whatever is programmed on that infrastructure for that character is absolutely being replicated and passed through just with that true asynchronicity. So what that means is now whatever behaviors are attached to an object, it will pass that through so long as it's not targeting a general audience. So as long as the script is only flipping the people that should be flipped, then we have no problem. And so let's say we're playing a multiplayer game though, and an enemy is in between both of us. On the client side, let's say now, because of who I am and the way I like to design, in my future content, I'll be creating a new player finite state machine, which usually will start with player finite, but in the initializer, we'll be running an initializer script, which then manages all of the client side returns, which means that we can run programming through the client side, which says that if an enemy is in front of you, have it face you. But then that way it's not sending that signal to the server. And so the client will, although the enemy life state and death state, whatever the behavior is, will be synchronized between the players. We can actually make it, even if you're beating it up with another player, it will always face you if you wanted it to, or something like that. Let's say we're playing a top-down game where that's relevant or important. Now all of these behaviors are asynchronous, which means we do not need any extra features to get developing right into our multiplayer game. So as long as you set the ownership correctly and synchronize to make sure that when this is pressed, only it happens to you, the server automatically now sends that client data for you, which blows my mind. Blows my mind. That is foolproof, easy multiplayer on a obtainable level for everyone. I just oh my Lord, Alex, speak. Clearly. Okay. So, I was just digesting all of this with you in real time because I hadn't spent the time on the newest update. So it's been a little rough on this video, but I am so thoroughly impressed. I have a brief 5-minute video that I'm going to shoot after all of this that just recaps some of the things that we learned and discovered today. But I haven't used this newest version, and I am so excited to start working on a project that brings that to you. And I want to show you. I'm working on my own game that isn't going to be released as a template, which is called First Z Outbreak. And once you get into, let me double click this. I don't know why it does that. Once you get into the game, you can build your player. I use my own system to build the player. You'll be able to get your username from your username from GDevelop, and when you confirm your game, you're going to be able to. You can see the pawn on top of your character's head, which will be invisible, but that's how I build the player. You're going to be able to play and move around in a 2D top-down 2.5D sort of game. So I've been working on that on the side. I just wanted to show off a little bit what I've been doing. And so with that multiplayer, you guys are going to be able to play this. I have a really interesting idea. So let me kind of show you what I'm doing. So with GDevelop now, they have, as we just saw, the basic multiplayer structure, which now means asynchronicity. So once that player is created, when the player does any input, it immediately goes to the server without you needing to send a signal, a special signal. Other signals that we might use is maybe a button press. Let's say we're playing Among Us and you wanted to hit that button on the table and then it started an alarm. You would say button pressed or emergency meeting, and then that's when you'd use a signal to signal everything else for players. So now that means that even if you're developing a single player game right now, you can convert it to multiplayer by one object being added in a couple code checks. That's amazing. And what I'm going to be doing in my system, so this is how the multiplayer works, but multiplayer has lobbies, right? So what I'm going to try to do in my system is I'm going to build the world so that each world has its own instance. So this will be an instance. And each instance will be able to have up to 8 players currently, because that's the maximum. But when you leave the map, so each map tile will have to be its own game scene event. But as you pass through the tile, it'll open the lobby and it'll force you to join if there is one that allows, because eventually they don't have it yet, but they will be allowing you later, soon, hopefully, you'll be able to join lobbies that are in session. So if there is not a lobby in session, which currently there won't be, you'll enter a lobby program, which will ask you to click on a new lobby, but you'll be able to start it by yourself or a minimum of 2 players, right? So that means that you can now create effectively a pseudo MMO or just a massive online role-playing game, right? So maybe not an MMORPG, but an MORPG, because basically you can create a chat system using other programs, Firebase or a backend server, a relay server, the built-in one from GDevelop, to allow texting between all of the players that are signed into your game. That's irrelevant. We can get a huge player list and allow everybody to chat to each other, like in the bottom of your screen. But then, when it comes to instances, you would then have to basically build a system where when you went between 2 levels, it would load you in with a maximum set of players if the lobby's already there, and if it's not, create a lobby and wait for players to join. And that way, when you travel around, you can kind of expand your world and generate lobbies and everything. That's a way around the system currently. That would be very cumbersome until they add in a lobby creating system. So for now, in my game anyways, and what I'm working on, until that feature's out, it'll basically, you could play up to 4 players in co-op. And it'll be, or you can, including couch. So if you are playing on 2 controllers, it'll add 1 player to that list when you go to join, and that'll drop it down to 3. But I want to do a top-down Left 4 Dead style, so there's going to be lots of zombies, there's going to be hordes, there's going to be roguelike power-ups that I want to add, because it's going to be all randomly generated. So until that system comes out, you'll have to join a single room and do that. But when the system comes out that allows for a more flexible joining experience, then we'll have seamless transitions. And even if there's a low lobby count, we'll be able to continue. We'll be able to check if there are people in a lobby, how many people are in the lobby, like, is it joinable? Is there a spot to join in, or do I need to create a new lobby? And if all of this works out of the box, we should then be able to also integrate Steam pretty seamlessly and be able to make sure that both the login system for Steam as well as the lobby system for GDevelop is asynchronous. I'd probably need to make a custom extension, but I have no doubt in my mind that it's entirely possible. Yeah, so basically in my game, when everything's built, when you go to, let's say we're playing Left 4 Dead, if you guys have played it, there are acts. Let's say that each act is going to have a transition between Act 1 and Act 2. If this was an online RPG with this sort of element in it, it needs to be seamless, right? So to do that, it would be open. It would have to be an open world game. So let's say this is the game map, and this is region 1, this is region 2, but it's an actual open world where everything is open. You would do a seamless transition, or you do a slight loading screen between these loads into the levels, which would then look for an empty server or someone matchmaking for that and pair you together and start a new lobby, or join one that's already in session. And then when you leave, disconnect you from that session and add you to another session. So you're just bouncing between lobby to lobby. And that's how it looks like on the back end. And we can connect all of our game this way. Or like currently in GDevelop, you could technically do that. So let's say we go back to the same version. Right now it's a loading screen, right? So what that means is that you can trigger that lobby load anytime you collide with something or click a new button. So maybe let's say in our game, let's say in my game specifically, because it's that top-down format, let's say there is an edge of the map that I get to where like there's a hitbox, the camera doesn't move any farther. Let's say when you get within, let's say, this radius, it says press E to travel, right? When that E is pressed or that travel button is initiated, we can set it to open the lobby. And then it'll look for new rooms in the lobby that are waiting and pending. And then that's how it currently would have to be. You'd have to load in, wait for the players, and then connect the new lobby, and then go through that door into the other place. But this is kind of handy because imagine there's a bunch of clever ways to do this. Imagine your game is also single player, so you don't want online features at the very beginning. Maybe there's a part in your game where you can enable multiplayer, or there's like instances. Let's say you're playing a single player RPG, but then you can join an arena and battle players online or play Pokemon online. What you would do is you would bypass this system entirely, and you would wait until, like in Pokemon, that you go to a console and it asks you if you want to upload, want to connect to the online network. And then if you do that, it looks for lobbies and a player for you to battle. So you could do matchmaking. And matchmaking itself isn't currently available in this format, but it is coming, right? So they've already said that. And so when we could then enter this and open the lobby list, and then you could wait for your friend to join you, and then you could start an online lobby and battle together. Or join, let's say that there's a special event happening in the game, you do a server trigger that opens a menu that says, would you like to join online? Queue up and then join one now. It opens for all of the players, and then they can either bypass this and say, I don't want to play it, or they say, yeah, I want to play it. And then it loads them into that multiplayer experience. So there's a lot of functionality in this because of that asynchronous stuff. And it would be very easy to do it. Okay, and easy is a matter of perspective, right? What I mean is it would, comparative to generating and creating all of this by yourself, GDevelop is handing you a foolproof solution out of the box with minimum effort. That is mind-blowing. I have been around in all of these engines, for Unity, Unreal, I've used Godot, I've used SourceWorks, I've used tons and tons of editors over my life, tons and tons of I've learned Love Lua, I've learned Python, Pygame scripts, I've worked in Scratch, I've worked in pretty much any program that has a visual aid design program. I've worked in Game Maker, RPG Maker as well for over a decade. And so, with all of this experience that I have with all of these programs, I have to say there has never been a multiplayer solution as dead simple as this, in my opinion, with the flexibility that it has. There are some that just have multiplayer working out of the box, but I honestly can say that this has to be by far one of the best multiplayer formats I've ever seen. Now, Maui Game says they're looking at creating a competitive card game, and I think that this setup would be perfect for that. So, you know, like in a card game format, you'd have to think about it pretty interestingly. You have to think about it as this isn't like player 2 and player 1, in my opinion. This is always the main player, so this would be like main, and then this would be, so I would use the same version, the same style that I have for my current fencing game, which is basically rendering a champion and a challenger. And so the champion would be on the bottom and the challenger's on top. And so what happens is if you are your player is always played down here, so your cards would be like here, so here's your cards. And if you're playing a monster game, I don't know, whatever, you've got your sword, your shield, defense, whatever, your monsters, and then your playing field is down here. So you would render it, this would all be client side, so it'd say, oh, you go here, and then they would go here, but vice versa. Whoever the player is that's playing, you'd draw their screen like that. Yeah, like home and away. That's a good way of thinking about it. But when you are the player and you're fighting somebody else, you're always the home team. So let's say this is the home team, but technically that's the client home. Does that make sense? Now, again, people, you're not asking me for my, telling you how to program, but I'm just saying that I think that the way that I would design this personally is that the host, or we'll say this is the current player, is always the home square, and the challenger or whoever you're versing, the versus player, would go up top. So home and away would be another great way of understanding that, and that way you can keep perspective. So another one of the games that I've been deeply requested to make is Clash of Clans, and I'm currently in the format of that. The left player, I do the same thing. The left player is always you, and the enemy is always this way. And when on their screen, you're over here, and vice versa. So it needs to translate and mirror whatever's going on. So on the client, so even though that like the enemy is here, that is a reverse for you. So the server would read it like you versus whoever, and it would just, if on their screen it's over here, mirror it to over here, and just invert it. So basically you're playing a mirrored version of yourself, and it would just flip the orientation depending on who the challenger is and who's not, while also maintaining consistency between each game, where, unless you want it to be a part of your game, where it feels like, the move, like the lanes or whatever, maybe you are a challenger and you want to be on this side, or if it's home field advantage, maybe you always, whoever you are attacking, whoever is defending is always on the left, whoever's attacking is always on the right. I don't know. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but I would personally, to keep game consistency, always allow there to be some visual format that is consistent always. Always make it consistent. And that way, unless it's a feature of your game to make it feel like there's more going on, otherwise don't do it. Do it like this. This is my opinion. This is my opinion, though, so it's up to you. But I think that format would make sense. And then it's mostly server end, and it would just be like client rendering to make sure that the cards are right. So if player has a deck, load that deck into the game. It's asynchronous, so when they click on the card, it's random for everyone. So it's not like, one of the things you have to worry about, because technically now multiplayer, right? There's no checks and balances. So what that means is we now, as players, you may be wondering, how do we stop hacking in our game? How do we stop hacking? That's kind of difficult because of the way that this is built. In this version of GDevelop, there's no checks and balances between variables. So if a player right? If a player is in control of an object, and I'm actually going to go to my art program here. Oh, I am in my art program. What am I doing? What I mean is in sorry, I was reading there. So basically, though, what you would want to do in Alex lost his train of thought. Reel me in. What was I gonna say? What was I talking about? Oh shoot. It was important, and my brain shut off on me, and I don't remember what we were on this. We were on the subject of something specific, and now I feel guilty because I can't remember. Hello, brain. Multiplayer. Come on, Alex. What were we talking about? Yeah, it was after Clash of Clans. Now I can't remember. Hmm. It had to do with shared variables, I think, in the game, but now I can't think about what exactly it would be. Hmm. Hmm. Oh well. Whatever. So, yeah, so I'm thinking that effectively now to make, I mean, we did create a multiplayer example of basic platforming. Now, what I want to do though is digest the professionals, right? Let's digest what GDevelop has done and how we can sort of replicate and build. Oh my goodness, Matt, thank you. That is so important. Matt, I got it. See, you guys went back. Someone went backwards in my video to go listen to it. I'm pretty sure. He's like, "What was he gonna say?" Hacking in our game. Before I get distracted again, sorry, I've got ADHD. I got to come back to this. It's so important to me. Yeah, I appreciate it. So, but we had to. What I was gonna say though is because player control. So a player, when we do a server, this is kind of interesting. So when you're saving game materials, you're saving it to a local folder because there's no server to hold the data on because we don't have a database, right? So without a database, we have to use local variables. Well, local variables can be addressed even if you lock them tight. There is no it's impossible. They will find a way. If it's a local variable, they will find a way. So if player speed is something that's controlled by the player, like the player that they're saving, let's say you have a global variable, right? Or an object variable of some sort that is saved on the player's computer through a global variable that's reloaded back in the game, and one of the player states is speed, right? Then what they can do is target that save file, increase their speed limit, and then launch the game, and they have modified that key. And now that key is crazy. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, now they can zoom across the map and do whatever they want. Now, because we have asynchronous players, that means that local variable is now taking control and is allowing them to do whatever they want. So whenever you're saving variables, saving content and whatever, you need to do checks and balances. Now, because one clever way to do this is through achievements, or some validation through a database to find out who's cheating and who's not. And so one of the recommended ways that I would consider handling this is by adding, if you're going to have an online game, add a database, right? And there's a bunch of different ways that you can go about doing this. And you want to save a score variable or some sort of variable on a public leaderboard, right? And now we have leaderboards. So we can do this right now with GDevelop. And let me explain how you do this. So we use a database. And in this case, it's the leaderboard. So the leaderboard. When the player who is connected loads into the game, we're going to take their leaderboard stats like an achievement and pass it back to the player. Now, here's what we do. Okay? If it's a multiplayer game, this is what we do. If the player has a leaderboard, so if they have played before and they have a leaderboard, all of their stats, you can do some sort of arbitrary score that's invisible. Maybe they don't even see it, right? Do an invisible leaderboard. You don't need to allow them to access it or anything like that, but we're going to save a single player per player, a player name like player.id, whatever their unique player ID is. We're going to upload it, which is in this case, because we're using GDevelop, it's their GDevelop account. Now their account is connected to that leaderboard. The leaderboard is now going to have a score or some system key, right? So the way we do a system key is by generating a score. So we're going to say that the player's score is their current life, right? The life value plus game score plus whatever. So we have a variable, a number variable. Now that we have the number, we can then check at when the game loads, we check their key. And because let's say your speed is part of that, so if this equation includes speed and it's been altered, your score will be different when you load the game, right? Your score will be different than the leaderboard because you changed something. If that's the case, ban them. That's it. Make it backwards, right? Flip this backwards. So when they load into the game and they get their key, let's show this again. So when they log in and they get their first key, when they log out or quit, they get a system key. Now their system key is a score. And that's a hidden score. That's actually located on the server because it's hosted by GDevelop, right? So if it's hosted by GDevelop and it's in the server, we can check their leaderboard score. And if that leaderboard score is, let's say it's backwards. So let's say it's 2, 3, 3, 5 on the server. When we save the key, it's 5, 3, 3, 2. So that way we jumble the math. There's no way for them to dissect what our math is because they can't see it, right? That's on the server backend. That's in the actual program in the GDevelop previewer, the editor, all of that, right? They can't see that. So now that goes out, it's blind. They don't get to see it. That we invert it. And then the player, when they load in, it automatically does the math. It adds everything up. And if that score does not equal 2335, which is this backwards, it'll then invert it. So let's say they changed it. Now it's 5, 2, 2, 1. And then it inverts to 1, 2, 2, 5. That obviously, right? That's just an extra layer of security. And so, because they could probably figure it out, like if you left the score there, then they can like hack and then change it back or something, go offline, change it, upload, like, you know what I'm saying? But this would be one way of integrating some sort of anti-hack system. So basically, when you are the host and they connect to you, when you go to start the game or whenever, like before you do a trade, there's tons of ways that you could do this. Whenever the player save happens, if they successfully leave the server the right way, when they leave the server automatically updates every second that they're gaining score. It's not like they die and then it updates the score. It's happening constantly because of the way that the leaderboard system works. So as long as we're doing it right, then what we can do is, what's going on, Bob? What we're doing right now is we're discussing how you could integrate anti-hacking tools this early in GDevelop. So what we're talking about is we're using a leaderboard system or a database system that has a leaderboard in it. We would then, every time a player connects to the host or to, like, let's say you're playing a cooperative game and you're hosting the game and you want people who join your server to be, because they're going to create a new character every time they join your game, right? So let's say you're the server, you're hosting it. We're playing a game where they have a player on you're the MMO server, right? So when they connect to you or a cooperative game and you want to make sure that hackers who started on your server aren't hacking and changing their variables while playing on your server, we can then register their player ID, which is already done through GDevelop. When they log in using the GDevelop system, we get the player ID. We take the player's ID and we create a leaderboard that creates a score. And that could be like, let's say when they load the player save for the first time, it's their stats, some math that includes the player stats. It loads it in. It generates a score based on your stats. That when you are in the server, when you create the character in the server, will be generated for you. And upon every load in of the game server, it'll check that value. So basically what happens is there is a way to not make them public. Yeah, you can make them not viewable. You have to give them the option to see the leaderboard. So you add the leaderboard, but then, which is already added to your game innately, it just isn't in function in GDevelop. You can then target that leaderboard, look at their key, which is the score that they generate. It then, when they log back in another time, that, let's say when you're on the server and you leave the server, whether you crash or anything, every minute it's saving, or every second, every millisecond, it's saving your server to the server. And so we get a system key from GDevelop, that is your score. We then put that score in the system, and whatever this random key is, we then flip it backwards or do whatever we want to it, and then it spits it out to the player and it saves it on their local variable. But if they change their variables, that score will not be the same. So when they reconnect to the game, if their score isn't the same and it's been changed, ban them because they've changed the score. Period. That's it. That's it. That will prevent anyone in your game from hacking. It'll kick them out automatically, and as long as you build it up. If the score isn't the same, kick them from the lobby and just automatically do it. So that way it doesn't matter how many times they try to reconnect or anything like that, it will ban them. And over time, when we can host our own servers and have more control, you can then take that player's name, add them to a banned ID when the players start, while in lobby. Oh my goodness, I have hiccups. While you're in the game lobby, you can set it so when they connect, check your ban list. That's a D, but I tried to turn it into a B. Ban list. And if they're on the ban list, automatically kick them out. Ban them again, right? And that way they can never get in. Okay, so now there is, of course, but there isn't a way to then prevent them from editing the file. Because technically anything in GDevelop is saved that you save is saved as a local variable. Now, here, there is one way around it, okay? Kind of. So let's say you made a multiplayer game that you have a bunch of servers. Let's say it's Valheim. We're going to use Valheim. If you guys have played Valheim or Minecraft, that's another great example, Minecraft. So Minecraft is like this. Let's say you have a local save and you've been leveling your character up on a different server. So let's say this is the server. This is a server. This is another server. We want to be able to take your, in Minecraft, every time you join, it's your, you have to start a new save, right? It's independent. So players are saved by the host. So players are then saved by and this isn't a server, this becomes a host. So that's how it works. Players are then saved to the host. And then when the host connects and starts the server, the players and all of their items are saved via the owner of the server. And that's how we prevent other players from tinkering with their player. Now, if you're playing a game that you have a local save, so a local save is you. So this is a you save, and this is a host save. A you save can be processed to a host save, but the problem is there is no validation here. There is none, which means that if they change anything and they send it to you and then you create it, there is no way to prevent it, right? Except for using the method that I just discussed. Because if me as the game creator has a lobby system, a leaderboard, right? A leaderboard system, then whenever you create a character, it will automatically, whether it's a user or a host character, be saved to the leaderboard. And that's how you would allow them to you would say, transfer files to this game world. Once that is done, store their game world data into the player's database, check the player against the leaderboard. If this is invalid, ban them, just like you would before. It's the same system, and you can transfer between lobbies, no problem. It literally, it's the foolproof way to make a ban system with how little we have. It's not a great ban system. There are ways around it. But this is the best way with what we have, in my opinion, to check global variables and structures without creating some convoluted giant AI program that's constantly working on banning players, because there's no hosted server. So this would require, though, the game to be 100% online play if you wanted that system. But if it's just a user save, right? So let's go backwards a second. A user save that's offline doesn't have to connect to the leaderboard. But if they opt into online play, then that character, so I would say at character creation, if they chose single player, then you wouldn't allow this to happen. If they chose multiplayer from the beginning, even if they're not in a lobby that has players, then their multiplayer save is documented and is protected by our infrastructure. Does that make sense? So, yeah, okay, so what happens in GDevelop, right? So to answer Riley's question, which is a good question. Exactly, Bob. Exactly. So this is kind of a two-in-one question. So let me answer for those that aren't watching live. Maybe they'll come back and watch this later. I will be again. I'll be making a very short video on this digest. But we have local saves, right? And we have a host. Now, all saves in GDevelop are local. All of them are local. They have to be saved somewhere locally. Now, local is relative though. Okay, so relatively, everything needs to be saved locally. Now, what that means is that at the beginning of the game scene, we need to load a local variable from a global unless we have a database. Now, if we have a database, we can load variables straight to and from a database. This would be better. This would be the ideal way to do it. You should set up a Firebase account and not use leaderboards. So a Firebase account would be better. It's free to do this. And then every time you log in, you have to validate your account. You have to log in, and then all of your saved data is saved automatically through the server. The server is a host. So if it is a local host, that means that the server or the host player processes that information for you, and it automatically happens through the GDevelop infrastructure. So there is a whole database setup that you can do that for, no problem. Now, once you have that connection, we can even link Firebase to leaderboards as well, to the GDevelop leaderboard. There's multiple ways of doing this. You can go back and forth. There's some pretty cool tooling that happens here. But effectively, if I was to design it from the ground up, I would start with a global variable, or just a variable for the database, and then run it through Firebase. And that means that every time they connect, they load that Firebase save. It doesn't matter if they've changed something locally, Firebase will overwrite their account. So that's one way of doing it. Now, I'll say this again for everyone who didn't hear this before. Local variables, local, can always be changed. So imagine opening the dot location of a file and going to the config, right? And changing it from the config dot, or the config dot config or ini, right? Let's say it's an ini file. So config.ini is what we're expecting to find there. And that is what we're talking about. Anything you save locally in GDevelop, anytime you save data like sound, that's a local variable, and that you would want to save locally because the player, when they load back in, their sound settings should be saved locally. Their graphic settings should be saved locally. Those are things that players should control. But players should never control in a game their inventory. Like in terms of like when you generate something on the server should roll the dice to determine what loot the player gets and then create it and assign it to the player. If the player can create their own loot, or if you're using the player, then they can dupe items and spawn it themselves. So you got to be really paying attention to what a player can and cannot do. And that's why in this particular format, a finite state machine is paramount. Because if you build a finite state machine, then you can restrict everything the player can do inside of the finite state machine. So if it's inside of the finite state machine, the player has control over it. If it isn't inside of the finite state machine, the player shouldn't have control over it. And that's how you manage that. And that's the best way that I can say to manage it. So in this case, if we did start with so going backwards again, with the local host and server features, right? So here, we have the basic infrastructure. These are kind of, at the very beginning, these are the same. So a local variable should be like player settings. And host settings should be like an index of loot. Let's say this is loot. So loots should all be done by the host, and it gets sent this way, and then it gets saved here. And let's say that each loot item has a hash. Like if I was to program this in a really, like, trying to stop hackers, let's say I was going to make Diablo online, like the original Diablo, or like Diablo 2, Diablo 1, Diablo 2. Diablo 2 would be better. Well, actually, I'm not. actually. That is a Maui. I'm actually talking about in a server format. A local is a client. So maybe client would be a better word here, because it's a client and host. So a local variable, it would work like you were saying, loaded in, but a local variable is technically anything that's saved locally and not in the local variables option. What I mean is when you use the load and save features of GDevelop, and it's a good point that you brought it up, because I don't want there to be confusion about it. So when you go to save something like your global variables, say here we have settings, controls, schematic, or cosmetics. Each of these, right, are going to be saved in my settings menu with a username. So if I save my game, so if I go into the main menu, which has nothing in it, the player, we're changing the variable here, right? Now on start, we create a player that's blank because there hasn't yet been a player created. So we create the first player's sprite, we change the Z order to match, and then we wait for the player to change the input of what their character is, right? And then when we go to press play, we save each of these global variables to the player object. Now, because it's a player object, and I'm loading in from a global variable, and I'm saving it into a file, if I wanted to continue to save this game, right? Let's say I wanted to save my settings, and I wanted my player to always look like this every time I come back to the game, then what I would have to do is save that locally, and that's what I'm talking about. So local storage, local saving. So going backwards and going to another program that I've done, let's see. I'm trying to think here off the top of my head. What is another game where I have loaded in player settings? It's actually Super Toast World. Yeah. So in Super Toast World, we do this at the very beginning. At the very beginning, we unload, we check for saved data, repeat for each instance of saved data that there is, and we're going to load in the saved data. So here, this is a single player oriented game, right? It's Mario, it's saved locally in your browser, it's saved locally in your cookies, or it's saved in a save location. If I was to play this game right now, right, and let me press preview and show you. Let me turn down the volume because it's going to be loud. All right. Oh, you guys don't even have audio set up. I forgot about that. Let's see here. Where did I put that? Settings. Alex, where'd you put it? Let's see. Advanced options. Properties. There we go. All right, let me switch this over to my headset. My bad. There we go. All right, let me turn that down. So what I have here is we have a saving system, and it has 0% here because I've actually started saves already. So if I launch this and get into my game, it's reviewing save data I already have. Where does that go? You might be wondering, where does that go, Alex? Well, when you save your game, I'm going to turn that off because it's very loud, and we go into our app data. So you can do Control R. Oops. Control. Hello? Not Control. Windows key. And my Windows is freaking out because this is running in full screen mode for some crazy reason. Hello? Can we not run that in? Okay. All right. You can type run if you wanted to. And that's what that should pull up. But effectively, if you type your app data in here. Hello, Alex. There we go. App data. It'll pull up your roaming folder. And inside of your roaming folder, you should have a GDevelop 5 folder. Inside of that, you have a local storage folder. And inside of local storage, we have all of the storage that you would need for your levels. So if I have the hiccups. If I was to delete this, which I can't right now because I'm currently inside of GDevelop. So we're going to close GDevelop down for a brief moment. I'm going to delete the levels database. Hello. I'm still in it. That's why. We're going to close this again. We're going to delete the database. Now it's gone. And now all of my saves for all of my projects that I was working on is now disintegrated. You don't have them anymore because it's local saves. Now, as you create and launch products, they'll be saved in different files like that. But in preview, it's all saved in the same spot. So you just got to be kind of pay attention. You can look at the date stamp if you wanted to. But for me, local saves don't matter. I'm not like playing any of my games in my browser or like playing them here. They'd be saved in like my cookies or somewhere else. But when you're doing that, that's where that would go. And then we can go now back to Super Toast World. That's the wrong one. Hello? It like booted off my Super Toast World 3. What? My source. What the heck? All right, we'll open it. Open on my computer. We're going to go to desktop, Super Toast World template, and we're going to launch that. I believe that this is the, yeah, okay, good. So, now when I go to preview this title, it would help if I started in the right place. We're going to go back to the main menu. We're going to start our game. And now you'll see that they're all new games, right? So what happens is when I save that, this is now creating a local save file. And that local save is going to my local storage. Now, those variables, if I had the right tools, now watch. Now, I'll leave because my game has a setting where if I close the game, it automatically saves because I'm saving save data at a specific location. So at certain events. Now, if I went to go relaunch the game and I went back to it, okay. So I didn't actually beat anything. I didn't trigger a save moment. I forgot. I actually have to go into a level to do that. So when I actually go into a level and die or whatever, and it'll save my data. So I've got 3 lives. We're going to go into my game, and I'm going to die real fast. There we go. So now that I've died and I've lost life, as you can see in the top left here, now when I leave the game, it saves at the end of every level and at the start of every level. So now that I have that and I go to run my game again, we should now see that my save data 1 has 0%. So I'm saving it to have multiple save features, right? And by the way, if any of you are interested in it, this is completely free on itch. You go to itch.io/@levelupwithalex, or sorry, levelupwithalex.itch.io. And you can check this out for free. The assets will be out later this weekend, and version 0.0.2 is on its way, where multiplayer will be added, and we'll be doing a hot seat style, so it'll be like Mario. But now, with that save data now being reloaded, I can edit this. This is a text file, right? That is my own sort of thing. But here, we have a manifest of the save. Now, I personally have no idea how I would edit this, but someone who does, right, can get in here, who can extrapolate this information, because it's JSON, figuring out how to, like, look at this data down here. Map 1, this is the save data. If I changed level to true and added a score, right here, score, watch this, 500,000. Oh, that's too much. We'll do like that. And I saved it. We're gonna, well, that's the log, but you know what I'm saying? So like if I could get into it and I could change this, we would then see that score. It'd be that easy to change if I had the right tools to open it up and be able to address it. So it's being locked currently, and as long as they can get themselves into here, they'll be able to open it up. Right? So they can just pop it open, change those settings, and then they can load into your game. And so we want to stop that from happening. How do we do it? Well, there's a bunch of options out there. I think that one of the better templates I've seen handle that problem is actually is the Firebase system, and I think Vegetato is the one who really dives into that. I'll be making a Firebase video myself here shortly, but because when I integrate my system, my anti-cheat, I want to show you guys how I do it and how I think it's a good solid method to use. So we'll be diving into that. I have some announcements to make about classrooms. I have my own classroom system coming, but I don't really want to dive too much into that because I have more stuff going through my Ko-Fi account. So if you guys don't know what Ko-Fi is or Ko-Fi, check it out down there in the bottom left. ko-fi or coffee.com/levelupwithalex. I do have a mentorship program that I run on my Discord server. Of course, I'm always there to help you guys out, but I am moving over into a actual educational style classroom. I am an educator, and I'll be using a Udemy like structure. It'll be hosted on my own website, and it will be hosting my classroom. And anyone who has who's a Ko-Fi patron of a certain caliber will get access to that in the learning materials. But also, I have a professional thing where we do monthly workshops for those that want hands-on experience and want to digest all of that. I'm just kind of casually talking right now. I will be getting off here very shortly. I wanted to dive into this because it's immensely important to me that we start reviewing all of this content. I have a vastly different way I'm going to be releasing videos in the next few weeks. Right now I've been prepping I'm redesigning every one of my videos around the new changes because I have to. Those changes are pretty serious. You could still follow the other tutorials, but it will be a little bit more difficult, and I want to modernize everything. And so I'll have more things coming. It'll be more in depth. It'll cover I'm going to be doing smaller videos, much smaller. These are, of course, my live streams, but I'm going to try to keep doing one live stream a week where we can like hang out. You can ask questions. I can show you guys whatever. And I'll do like a weekly recap of anything I come across. And then I will still be making shorter videos, 3, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, somewhere in that, to make these other videos more digestible. And so I'm rebuilding my bootcamp series. That'll be my series to the classroom, although we'll be covering a lot of that in the classroom as well and in the ebook. But I do want to make sure that everyone who wants to learn all this information, it's available to everyone. I don't believe that your economic situation or anything like that should stop you from learning. And I want to make sure that anybody can learn from me as best as they can. So I'll be making sure that I'm continuing to make these awesome GDevelop in-depth series. But I also want to start doing my devlogs because I am making my own game, a couple of them. And I actually want to focus on that in my life, and then do my tutoring and teaching on the side. So rather than just being a general YouTube streamer or whatever, I have very specific goals in mind. So hopefully I'll continue to see you guys joining in. Everybody who's been subscribing over the last few days, it's amazing. I've got like 17 new subscribers in just a couple of days. It means so much to me. I can't wait to share so much more with you guys. If you have any more multiplayer questions, come join us on Discord. Come hang out with the family. We have an awesome server full of just quality people looking for, building their own games. And it's a great place to get connected with other people and other working professionals as well. So if you'd like to get to know me a little bit more, I'm always in there. I'm always available. I try to give time for everyone. So thank you guys so much for stopping in. Thank you for digesting the GDevelop update for update 5.4.204. That's been pretty exciting. I can't wait to give you guys the actual in-depth tutorial on how to build these multiplayer functions, how to build the menus and everything else. That's a whole series that's coming. So thank you guys so much. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Remember, happy game making, and I'll see you next time.